YouTube. And then that led to, if I share my screen here real quick, the Podcast Marketing Bible, which is a book we were talking beforehand. Juergen, you're saying this might be a little old in the tooth?
It's, it's like a half a year old. So, in podcast time frames, it's getting long in the tooth. No, really, it's that the Podcast Growth Show, the actual podcast, is only a few months old. I've just basically launched it. And through the first season, some of the topics and discoveries that have happened, really ought to belong in that book, and they're not yet. So it's time for edition 2 very soon. And you were saying the same about your book.
Yeah, I wrote a book called More Podcast Money, and there's no mention of Patreon in it because it didn't exist when I wrote the book. But I do like the book. If you want to check it out, again, Podcast Marketing Bible, and check out his show, podcastgrowthshow.com. And your company is Polymash. Tell us a little bit about Polymash. And I know you do web design and podcast launches and all sorts of other fun stuff.
It's a very checkered history. I mean, Polymash really comes from the name. So I had a corporate, I started as an artist and a photographer, then, went over to the dark side into the world of banking, where I was a programmer. Ooh. I actually worked for Apple for a while. We delivered what was called the consolidated payment method. And that was a way to get iTunes developers paid across what used to be 50 countries. And we consolidated that into 4 or 5 regions. So that was kind of a cool project to be working on, and being able to travel to Cupertino and so forth. But, I retired about 10 years ago and then started my own agency, and that's Polymash. And the name kind of came from poly, which means many, and mash, it's a mashup of many things, because I hated niching down. I'm like a terrible nicher, and I should be, like everyone's telling me, well, you got to do one thing, and you got to do one thing really well. And I'm horrible at that. I had too many interests, from music to, everything else. And so that grew Polymash. And and so the Growth Show really came about because we're working for our customers and their content strategies and their lead development from a marketing angle. And no one wants to produce content. I mean, the internet runs on content. And no one was willing to produce content, but everyone loved talking about what they do. And so we now help people do just that. So businesses jump on the phone with a buddy and talk about what they're passionate about, and we turn that into content. So we're fairly, not just audio content for podcasts, but show notes content, SEO, purposeful inbound marketing copy. And it's not, I'm mentioning the word marketing maybe too much here. It's not really about that, but it was getting some of our clients and customers who were very averse to creating their own content or ever writing a blog post or shooting any video. Somehow they glommed on to podcasting as a much more fun way to produce their content for their businesses.
Nice. So it's one of those where, like, the one thing everybody's going to ask, what's it like to work for Apple?
Oh my God. Oh, well, I wasn't an employee there. We were just, what's it like to be a contractor for Apple?
Okay.
It's nothing to speak of, really.
Well, we do have a question in the chat room. And again, we're at askthepodcastcoach.com/live, or if you want to call in, it's 330-294-9393. And it looks like Clay says, I have personal issues with Instagram. Join the club. I have an Instagram account. I think I have 4 posts on it. How much am I missing out on not having Instagram for my podcast? Is it worth having a visual assistant manage Instagram? What do you think about that, Juergen? Any thoughts on Instagram? Are you an Instagrammer?
I'm an ex-photographer, so I love Instagram for that, but I haven't properly, managed to mesh the visual and audio versus, web-based type content. I think Instagram is awesome. In fact, we launched one show that's still in the top 10 today. It's called the MFCEO. And, that guy had 400,000 Instagram followers. And by the time that he launched his podcast, it went to number 1, like overnight. So if you have a huge Instagram following already, or if you're doing something very visual, it can be an awesome, powerful platform. The guy was genius at somehow converting the followers on Instagram into podcast subscribers, into signing up on his website and doing things like that. So it can be very powerful. I just think that, it depends a little bit on what your topic is. I mean, if you had a photography podcast, that's a natural. But if you're talking about, I don't know, if you just have an audio thing, it's, I struggle with trying to figure out a good way for me to utilize Instagram because, I don't talk about photography on my show. How about you, Dave? What do you think?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I feel like the only thing I would use it for is to say, hey, I've got a new episode out. Or I guess what I need to do is see how other people are using it. Cause it just seems like here's a picture of my niece's birthday and I'm like, okay. And this is where to a certain extent, imposter syndrome comes in. Like, does anybody really care that I've got snow on my car? I'm like, okay, it's kind of like, but I guess, so I guess I need to see those that are using it well, what they're doing, and then kind of mimic that. Because at this point, it's a little bit like Twitter in the early days. We're all like, wait, you do what with it? And I get it, but I don't want it to be just a giant commercial because that's not a lot of fun. And
dude, your lifestyle is just not enviable enough. I think that's what it is. Because a lot of the, the people that I see on Instagram that, are also launching podcasts are sort of like, lifestyle. They're like, whether they're into makeup or, they're like on, they're young people with like the fancy cars in pub situations and that sort of thing, so it can work. And for me as an old dude, not so much,
See, that's it. I think a lot of it's going to depend on who your audience is, and that's one of those where, like I just saw where Michael Stelzner, who's been doing he does a really transparent YouTube show called, it's, I can't think of the name of the show, and that's going to drive me nuts.
What, the Social Media Examiner?
Well, there's that, but he's doing a YouTube show about the behind the scenes of running it.
Yes. Which he moved from Facebook, right? That happened. Did you remember that? Like a couple of months ago, he basically had a big announcement saying, look, Facebook is no longer viable as a video platform because the attention span has reduced down to 15, 20-second snippets. And we're not able to, get the traction beyond that 15, 20-second, watch time. But what we talk about really deserves 10, 20 minutes. And then he moved it to a YouTube channel, that one, right? I don't remember.
Yeah, it's called The Journey. Mike, I know it'll come to me eventually. And what's interesting is I kind of pop in and out of that show. And he was saying there was one episode, I haven't watched it yet, but it was called Goodbye to Pinterest. And that's kind of the whole thing this year is they're kind of using what they did last year, and they're politely and very transparently showing in this YouTube show, it's not working this year. And they're calling in all these experts and things like that. And so it just may be a case where, depending on who your audience is, they might be all over Instagram. They might be over Twitter. It may be a case. I keep having people tell me I need to use Pinterest. Like, take your show art and put it on Pinterest and have it link back to the episode. You'll be amazed. And I've never done it because every time I go to Pinterest, I go, oh, look at the pretty pictures. And that's about it for me. And then, Jeff says the toughest thing about Instagram is you can only add one link.
Yeah.
And this is where I see a lot of people, I want to think it's like link.tree, or linktree.io or one of those type things. It's a website. And what you'll do is you have the one link to your link tree. And then on the link tree, you will have like clearly named episodes, whatever, that people can then click on. So it's a way of kind of having one link that leads to many. And I actually saw somebody do that in iTunes where there was their podcast and you clicked on it and the link tree itself, not the most attractive thing I've ever seen. But it works. But I was looking for a contact page and about page, your typical kind of website. And it was like, when you go up, I think it's link.tree. Yep. Or link. Oh, there we go. Thank you. Chat room, linktr.ee. Yeah, that's easy.
I want that EE domain. Yeah.
So it's just one of those. And how do you know? You don't. That's one of those where you kind of have to just kind of play and throw things here and throw things here and see where you get your engagement from. And like for me, and this is one of those, is I guess I get the most engagement because I play the most on Facebook. I found out on Twitter, I get a little bit, but I did a very bad thing, especially last month with Twitter. I was playing with a tool called recurpost. It's cheaper than Meet Edgar, and I was using Social Media Jukebox, which is like $12 a month. And I could have sworn, because I was playing with recurpost, I had turned off Social Jukebox, or what it used to be called, Tweet Jukebox.
Yes, I know that guy.
Yeah, and I didn't. So I had two automatic.
Yeah.
And I had people say, "Look, dude, you're just killing me with all these posts." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, ooh, I am so sorry. I did not mean to just, it was just nothing but nonstop. Listen to my podcast." And I was like, "Yeah, that gets a little boring after you've seen another post and another post." And
yeah, with all these platforms, finding the right mix between self-promotion and, and actually sharing other valuable content is hard. And, especially depending on the frequency with which each platform, sort of operates. I mean, on Twitter, you can flood it a little bit more easily. On LinkedIn, you want to be very careful. And in Facebook, it just depends on the size and the annoyance level that you can have with your audience,
Yeah. Well, since she's in the chat room, the one and only Kari Porter Bond, I saw her post this, and we often say here on the School of Podcasting, as well as on Ask the Podcast Coach, he said, looking for the fun-filled, here it is, Ryan Parker.
No one will punch you in the face.
Yes, no one will punch you in the face. If you've ever started a podcast and then, well, life happened. Kari put this in a Facebook group. She says, and she has in quotation marks, I relaunched after a hiatus that had me so busy with paying clients. That's a good problem to have, by the way. I couldn't keep up with my quotation marks fun work on my podcast. And at Dave Jackson, whoever that guy is, his recommendation, I didn't apologize, which is, I always love to hear that. Like, you find a podcast, it's your first time listening to it, it's like, hey guys, I'm so sorry. I know I was going to say Wednesday, but it's Thursday and I'm late. And you're like, no, do not start off with an apology. She says, I didn't make it a big deal. I didn't give an excuse. Frankly, I didn't even bring it up. So here she is. She's gone on this hiatus. She's coming back. She says, and here's what she did. She cheated, which is awesome. I just updated the dates on my first 4 episodes to be more recent and published the 5th one. No one set me on fire. No one called in for reinforcements. No one batted an eye. And the post I sent out about it, the local community have been sharing like crazy. She said she got 56 shares on my podcast Facebook page that only has 300 fans. That's a huge percentage. Wow. She said, I did do a $5 boost, but as you can see, the page reach was nothing in comparison to the organic. I have never boosted a Facebook page, but everybody I know that has says you might as well just light your money on fire. She says, people have contacted me, didn't say anything about, hey, why did it take you so long? They were like, wow, this was really well done. And we're so glad you're bringing light to this subject. So there you go. If you launch and life immediately gets in the way and you you realize you bit off more than you could chew when you launched, I'm here to tell you that no one is going to use the phrase Dave always says, of course, no one's going to. Ryan K. Parker from foodcraftsman.com.
No one will punch you in the face.
Yes. So there we go. I thought that was just a great story. Have you ever done the old Facebook boost a thing where you pay to get people to see it?
Yeah, we actually have a whole episode in the Podcast Growth Show on using Facebook versus Google versus other sort of methodologies. And I agree, it can be hard. I mean, what's hard about Facebook is to find to target podcast listeners, and because when you're boosting a post, that'll go to people who are not necessarily past podcast listeners at all, and you have to develop a custom audience and go through some of the more advanced targeting options in order to increase the likelihood that your audience actually consists of podcasters. Now, that said, people will share content that's interesting, or if you have great show notes that are share worthy themselves, if your podcast episode titles are interesting and sort of click worthy, then a lot of things that influence that. Now, we we do Facebook marketing for clients, not necessarily just for podcasts, but for, everything else. So I've spent $50,000 in Facebook ads this year on behalf of other people. It's great to get to play with other people's money and, and experiment a little bit. And so that's also a constantly changing environment, but just boosting something, is pretty challenging unless you really sort of go into, well, what are some of the targeting options that I might have, really delving down into the interests that your audience might have and setting up a proper ad. It's not that hard to learn, but I find that that's way more effective than just sort of saying, just boost it, pay $5 and, and send it to whoever.
Yeah, that's, I haven't played with it. I've just now started playing. I have somebody doing some Facebook ads for me, and I went super hyper, like targeted, X DJs, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I'm tracking every link on the page. And she said, the good news is you're so targeted. You're like, your Facebook ad campaign is like, you're spending almost no money.
You're spending no money. Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's kind of a good thing. In this case, at least. I did see, I always go out to Facebook and I look for kind of different questions and things of that nature. And I have to say something because Jim would love to hear this. There we go. I just pressed the record button. I do this every Saturday. I get fun. I'm having fun. So the first part of this will be the audio from YouTube. The second half will be from the Rodecaster. It doesn't do any good to have a giant red record button if you don't press record. That's hilarious. Anyway, meanwhile, back at the farm, out at Facebook, I go out and I harvest questions. And I found this one. I went, because I have an opinion, but I always like to throw it out to the chat room. And this is from Jose. He says, how many of you have titled your podcast after your name? For example, the Joe Rogan Experience, Ask Gary V, or the Tim Ferriss Show. I'm debating if doing this is a bad idea, especially for category SEO. And my thought on this was everybody he named had a following already. Gary V, Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss. I was trying to think about it. Jay Moore calls his More Stories. He's a comedian. I'm not sure it's a great idea. Juergen, what do you think?
I kind of agree with you on that. Is like if you're well known in your space. I mean, I don't think you have to be as huge as Gary V but if you're well known or somewhat of a celebrity in your space, if it's a really strong personal brand thing and the rest of your website is all about you anyway, then maybe so. But otherwise, I like podcast names that actually thread the listener benefit somehow into the name. What am I going to get out of listening to this show, especially in this environment where we have, I don't know how many, what's the counting number of available podcasts out there now? 900 and something thousand.
It depends. It's anywhere from 650 to, someone else was like millions. And I'm like, wait, hold on now. But
and just open iTunes and look through the icon sets, and you see how many people are sort of doing this personal branding thing. And, the benefit is like in tiny letters, you can't even read it, with Coach Marie or with, so that I would emphasize the benefit over the, over the personal branding. And especially maybe in SEO, although SEO is that's a pretty competitive space anyhow.
Yeah. I would think the only benefit is if you meet somebody at a trade show or you're somewhere and you get to tell them what you do. I do this and blah, blah, blah. And I help people do that. And they're like, oh, I would like to know that guy. In theory, when they type in your name, you should come up now. Of course, that should come up from your website.
Anyway. On iTunes, if you look, it should come up anyway because of the author tag. So
I think to me, it's kind of a, like Kleenex right now is, that's the brand for facial tissues. But I'm sure when they first came out, people were like, wait, what's a Kleenex? You had to go through that whole thing. And it's just not going to be, I think you're putting a hill in front of you. So I see that. And I don't know, maybe you just, you're going to be your brand anyway, in a way. If you're a consultant or things like that, you're going to end up being the face of the brand anyway. I think it's a little overkill maybe to name it after yourself. Here's another one that I see a lot of. This was from, I guess it's the fun part. I always end up with these questions of people's names. I'm going to call it Rhea. It's RIAH. Yeah, we'll go with that. She says, where do you find inspiration for podcast episode topics? I've been procrastinating recording my next episode because I'm unsure of a topic. But the thing that really floored me about this was her show is about sex and relationships. And I was like, wait, how do you run out of topics when you're talking? Because there's the whole men versus, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, I'm from Pluto. And then you throw in, so that's just relationships, then throw in sex. I'm like, wait, how can you run out of topics? But Juergen, have you ever run into, is there such a thing as podcaster's block, where you're like, I'm not sure what the next episode's going to be about?
Yes, totally. I can relate. I mean, but then of course my show isn't about sex, so
Yeah.
but no, but we have a very kind of geeky strategic way of actually solving that issue, and that is that we are very for when I say we, the folks whose podcasts we produce or that we help, and so it's really about a strategy either for the entire season and to really think way ahead and do some planning. And what we do is SEO research. So because our show notes are such an integral part of discoverability, we get, the Podcast Growth Show, my own show, is tiny. It doesn't have that many subscribers, but I'm getting clients from it. Why? Because 65% of my traffic comes from Google search, from SEO optimized show notes, and from SEO optimized titles, and that takes planning. So that doesn't mean I can sort of sit down and sort of at the last minute try to come up with an idea. And so it's marrying the approach that we take. And I know it's not applicable for everyone, but the approach that we take is actually we go into KW Finder and tools like that, and actually in general interest area explore easy opportunity keywords, meaning keywords that people search for.
Downloads for being.
Sorry about that. I put my hand down and I hit my iPad. Sorry about that.
But so, make a long story short, I think that you can, if you plan ahead of time, the more ahead of time you get with this, the more ideas you have to choose from. And the way that we do it is then actually look for the SEO opportunities in that as well, and plan out 10, 20, 30 episodes. And you can, even if you want to switch up and change topics from week to week, you can usually select, from that list of potential episodes that you had made sometime in the past. So I'm not sure whether that's helpful. I mean, it's just the way that we do it. Well, what's your process?
It's funny. When I was watching your YouTube channel this morning a little bit, and like I said, I've been listening to your show and everything like that. And it's interesting how, in some cases, I think we love to listen to people that we agree with. Because I was sitting there going, yes, tell them, that's it. And it seems like, while you're not, obviously, nobody's going to ignore Apple, but you seem to be focused on, hey, there are people, there's this little thing called Google that people seem to use a lot. And if I can get good keywords, great show notes, people are going to find me through, they'll just go out to Google and I'm looking for a cooking podcast. How about I go out to Google and type in cooking podcast and see what comes up? Because so many people, and I understand, look, Apple has 60% of the market-ish, depending on who you talk to. And the fun part of that is I have people working at Libsyn that get upset because they put in all this information for the Apple Podcast app, and then they'll look at their show in the old iTunes software. And I think it's somewhat weird that the iTunes summary area that you put into, let's say, Libsyn, does not actually work in the software called iTunes. That drives me nuts. So I don't want to bash Apple, but there are times when I'm just their search and everything. And plus they've got a ton of podcasts in there. And I'm like, well, let's see, how else can people find me besides looking in iTunes? Oh, I know, Google. And that seems to be your kind of strategy. Again, not to ignore Apple, do what you can to keywords or whatever, titles and authors and things like that. But is that more or less kind of your strategy, is to?
Yeah. Look, this is probably a 5-episode rant if we were to, if we were to do it true justice. But really the discoverability on Apple has been an issue for us, because when I first started Polymash, we were an app development company, and we produced, I developed, I think we had about 10 apps in the iTunes store for iPhone and iPad. And we build apps for other people as well. And so we were even dealing with the discoverability issues, way back then, meaning that it's very, very tough to compete in this environment where you've got 500,000 apps, I think it was at the time, and now 900,000 podcasts, and they're changing their search algorithm. So to just over-rely, I think just people are over-focused on iTunes as the way to be found. And really what the Podcast Growth Show was about was exploring all the other ways in which you can grow your show that don't rely on iTunes. I don't want to say at all. I mean, like I said, I do think it's important.
Sure.
But, that's why we're very show notes centric. We're very web design centric, like the way that your podcast homepage is designed. There's a guy in Tennessee, Brian Harris is his name, and he developed something called the upside down homepage. Have you ever heard of that?
Just mainly because I listen to your show, but
so you've come across it there. Okay.
Yeah, but it was something else. Has it ever been called like the upside down skyscraper or something? Or I forget. I've been listening to a lot of different podcasts, but go ahead. Tell us what the upside down website is.
Well, so the upside down website is sort of a conversion optimized layout or design pattern for a website layout. And what we did is we sort of adopted this for podcast homepages. And this is why I want to bring this back to the iTunes discussion. A lot of people have a subscribe on iTunes button as the very first thing on their website. And, so you go to their website, you discover their podcast, and the very first thing that they want you to do is send your traffic over to iTunes and then, spend the rest of your time there. So, or people have 15 menu choices on top of their podcast, leave a review, contact us, do this, that, or the other. So what Brian Harris's design pattern is designed to do is to actually guide people through an experience and through your website in a more sort of orderly fashion, or in a fashion that you get to make sure that your best content is highlighted, that your best episodes, come to the fore, and that people can self-select their journey through your site and self-select, what they want to discover about your podcast. So the header of the site has no menu on it, and that's why it's called upside down. The menu of the site is on the footer. That's an oversimplification, but if you just have the header of the site and then you offer people the topics, maybe the seasons, one way to structure this is to have season 1, season 2, season 3. I've seen a few people do that. I think, that guy, History Podcast, I can't remember his name
Dan
now.
Carlin?
Not Dan Carlin's, one. This is another one. I'll think of it in a minute.
It'll come
But,
to you.
but basically, like when you go to the homepage, there's no menu. You start to scroll down. You see some of the best episodes from season 1, or you see an explanation of this was season 1, this is season 2, this was what season 3 was about. And, then you come to sections that have what's called pilot stories, where you really, sort of have a benefit-driven explanation of what to expect from that season, why you did it, what people can get from it from listening to it. And that is a lot more engaging. And guess what? Google loves that as well, because the time spent on the page, the fact that you're not bouncing, there's a little plugin on WordPress that's called reduce bounce rate, and it actually communicates with Google as you're scrolling down, so that even if you just ever look at the homepage and then you jump off, it doesn't count as a bounce once you start scrolling. And so all of those things can actually help to improve your authority, the ability in which the ability for your site to be found, and the ability for Google to basically start ranking it a little better.
Nice.
But that's, the point of that being really, don't send people off to iTunes right away, and, use your website to, to start building email lists. I mean, I think we've talked about that in the past, Dave. It's like, I would rather have 100 email subscribers to my podcast than 1,000 iTunes listeners who I don't know, who I can never communicate with again, and who I'm not sure whether they're actually doing anything, listening to anything, or, that are basically anonymous, So it's I call it like going on a blind date and never asking for the other person's name. It's like,
well, and especially if you're using your podcast to promote a business, that's the way to go. And that's where I've always kind of known this, but you'll hear going forward this year, you're going to hear Dave start coming out with some lead magnets and things like that. I've started working with some people, and they're like,
All
"Yeah,
right.
what are you doing? Where's your email list?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's this big." And they're like, "Yeah, that's a problem." Yeah, the other thing I see is I don't laugh. That's not the right phrase, but I kind of go, on one hand, I get happy because I'm like, oh, good. This is low hanging fruit. I'll have somebody contact me. Hey, Dave, I'd like to work with you. Let's make sure my content's good. And I want to grow my audience. And I'll go there and they'll have a really small one link only to Apple Podcasts. And I was like, when I was over in Australia last year, I found out that 80% of Europe is on Android. And I'm like, so when you're sending out on social media, hey, go to my show, and you're not sending them to your website, that makes me scratch my head. But even worse, you're sending out one link to Apple. And I'm like, why not send them to your website where they can subscribe on whatever they want? Or, they might see a pop-up that says, hey, come get Dave Jackson's new podcast gear guide, which doesn't exist yet, but it is in my head.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I mean, I think that the upside down homepage, and by the way, that was episode 5, I believe. Yeah. So it's podcastgrowthshow.com/E5 if you want to check out the design pattern, which you can download in an annotated PDF format in exchange for an email address, right? So it's that sort of thing that we try to build in. And I think that the upside down homepage emphasizes that right up front. So the primary objective is to collect an email address and provide some value in return. The secondary objective is to tell people about your show and what it's about, and to sort of get them connected with what they are interested in, a guided journey through your content, so to speak. And the links of where you can find the show and subscribe and listen to Android, iTunes, or Stitcher, or Spotify, or whatever, they're kind of at the bottom. And so it's it forces people to scroll down and at least have a chance at being exposed to the content that you're most proud of as a podcaster. So I don't think this is a tricky or slimy way of this is a way of serving your audience in a better way, because they get to self-select what they're most interested in, and along the way they're getting to discover more about what rings a bell for them.
Yeah, it always for me at least, I think it was last week, I felt bad. These poor kids are freezing to death. And it was the Boy Scouts trying to sell me popcorn. And I was literally like, as I walked by, they're like, want to buy some popcorn? And I was like, whoa, who are you? And I'm like, oh, it's the Boy Scouts. So I knew the backstory, but it's weird to just walk by somebody and go, give me some money. And I was like, oh, it's the Boy Scouts. Okay, I know. And then it was like $20 for a box of popcorn. I'm like, is this popcorn dipped in gold? I'm like, holy cow. Do you, in your travels, Darwin in the chat room here, and again, we're at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. Darwin asked, do you think most people even consider their international audience? Because I know when I talk to people that are not from America, they love to point out, and it's true, that's why they point it out, that Americans are kind of American centric. We forget that there are other people on the other side of the pond. When in your travels of helping your clients and all, do you think international?
Guilty as charged. I have to admit. I think, well, we have international clients, so
right.
We've got a cooking show in Australia and things like that. My wife's from Australia, so we've got some connections there. But yeah, guilty as charged. And I think that GDPR hasn't helped. I'm hesitant to think about whether I'm really compliant with all of the legal requirements of offering services, or having a website asking for an email address in Europe versus here. Then looking at the Facebook ad, for example, there too, often people geofence that to the United States only, or more, or even to smaller regions. So I think, I think Darwin has a point. I mean, I think we should consider those audiences. Now, I don't know, Dave, would you consider having your website available in multiple languages, for example? What does this look like if we were to do that, right?
See, that's a good question, because it's like, because there's different versions of that. I mean, one of them is to quit talking about Thanksgiving or Valentine's Day or something that's very, US specific. And then there are other things. I mean, that's a whole other level. Do I translate my website? Because that's the problem. For me, I would say I'm not going to translate my website, because not that I don't care about people that speak Spanish or German or whatever, but let's say I translate that, but I don't translate my videos. Well, that's not going to work. They read all the great copy, they sign up there in German, and they show up and there's some old white guy talking English in a video. I'd have to have a whole other version of that. So I think that's why I don't translate but see, again, the American in me doesn't realize that a lot of people on the other side of the planet are not like me, who speaks all of one language poorly, I might add. A lot of people on the other side of the pond speak multiple languages because of the stupid Americans who want everybody to speak English.
Yeah, but I think that's this ethnocentricity that we suffer from is, it's not something to be proud of. I mean, I think that if you're launching a podcast abroad, and especially if your podcast is in English, you're much more likely to target American audiences as well, and and do things that make sure that your listener base is as wide as possible. Do we do that in return? Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm from Germany originally, so do I take special care that my episodes are understandable, discoverable in Germany? And then, Apple and the regional setup between their podcast and iTunes doesn't help either, in terms of how your podcast is distributed abroad and visible there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, it's holy cow. I told you this always goes quickly. What I like to do about the halfway mark is just take a quick second to thank some of my awesome supporters. If you go out to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome, you can see some folks there. And I'm talking about really cool people like Josh Liston from onthebubblepodcast.com, Greg from debtshepherd.com, where he teaches financial wellness, the one and only Jonathan Bloom, who hit me up on Facebook. I'm like, did you see that the Road Podcaster has individual tracks? Maybe we'll talk about that in a second. He's over at weeklyawesome.com. Glenn the Geek Hebert, who I will be seeing shortly in March down at Podfest. You can find Glenn over at horseradionetwork.com. Josh Rivers over at podcastingexperiments.com. Max Scott up there in the air at aviationnewstalk.com. Shane from spybrary.com. I need to touch Shane. Shane has the coolest, because of my podcast story, in the works. It's not quite done yet, but I got to reach out to him today. She's in the chat room. You know her, you love her. Kari Bond from keywestperspective.com/podcast. And my buddy Ronsley over in Australia at the Amplify Media Group. You can find him at mustamplify.com. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, simply go out to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. But yeah, that was the big news this week. Everybody, I'm using one right now, the Rode, and this is where all like, it's the Rode Pro. Wait, no, the Procast. Wait, it's the Rodecaster Pro. If you want to check it out, go out to schoolofpoddcasting.com/Rodecaster. And of course, Rode is RODE. So when you have to spell it, you're in trouble. But they announced this week that I've been playing with this thing. It's basically, it's a mixer. I'll bring my camera over here. But it's a mixer. It's got a jingle palette so I can play fun-filled rim shots. And I can, right now, if you wanted to call in at 330-294-9393, I've got you tied into the phone line here. And I've got multiple headphone outputs and things like that. And we all said, hey, wow, this is a really cool thing. It is a little pricey. It's $600. But some of us that are a little control freaky said it would be really great if we had individual tracks. And apparently somebody at Rode heard and said, hey, guess what's coming in February through a firmware update? Individual tracks. And what's interesting is already this thing is hard to kind of get. I know at B&H they are on, like, get notified when these are available. So they're kind of sold out. I don't think they're available on Amazon anymore, if they were at all. Sweetwater, I think they're out. So I'm like, wow, this was a really hot item before they had individual tracks. Now with this, I'm like, oh, this could be one of those things like a Cabbage Patch doll or insert hard to find toy at Christmas here kind of thing. Juergen, what's your favorite hardware of choice when you're recording stuff?
I'd love to get one of those actually, but I haven't quite justified it yet. But one of the reasons was the inability to record separate tracks, and I think the firmware update is great for that. Dave, I don't think it's going to make the record button any bigger. No. For you, the firmware update. I'm
waiting for the one that just comes. Like I can set an alarm, like, hey, at 10:30, smack Dave in the face and make him press record.
But yeah, like, and we, every once in a while we get hired to go on the road and actually do on location recording. And so would you take this on the road with you for that? I think absolutely, right? I mean,
Yeah, the thing that's nice about it's a little bit like, it's always one of those things that depends on what you're doing. Because on one hand, I would say, well, go with a Zoom H6 and you can record up to 4 people on that individual tracks. But now you've got to have a headphone amplifier, if you have multiple people. And if you wanted to bring your music and such, well, okay, now I've got to bring an iPad, depending. And this is kind of all in one. So it's not as compact as a Zoom H6. But, or if I think about the person, that's like, hey, we're going to record in the basement. Oh, wait, my computer's upstairs. Okay, well, you don't need a computer for this. Or they want to go record in a bar. So it's kind of a toss up between the H6 and this. I can't remember. I think the H6 is, I want to say $400. It's not cheap either.
Yeah, a little lower now, but still, like, and I think the ease in which you can take other calls and, and basically connect, those things are, on the H4s. I mean, that's, Rode has, they've come out with a number of like mobile enabled solutions. I think they came out with a, dual lavalier mic setup for recording and, with their app earlier. I mean, I've got like a big Mackie 24. I used to have like this huge, ton of bricks kind of mixing console. And now they've gotten lighter and lighter. And I take the Mackie 24 on the road, if we need to do an on location type show. But that's still heavy and it's still bulky and it's still, it doesn't travel well. It doesn't have a case. It doesn't, you have to put it back in its original box. And, so I just, I like this. I like the, I still can't remember. I still can't pronounce the name of it. The Procaster, is it? No,
it's Rodecaster.
Rodecaster.
Rodecaster Pro. It took me a while to
It's like you just take Row, Pro, and Cast and mix up a bunch of mix them up randomly, and you've got the whole product line. I don't think it's a good idea because people get confused. I find it confusing.
Yeah, and then I know they just came out with, and I can't remember the name, but there's some sort of new podcaster mic that they just came out with. That is part here. Well, here I can hit a button here. I know I can't because I'm recording, but I know that it's supposed to be designed for podcasters. It's like the Podmic or something of that. So it's one of those things here. I'm a guide out to, nope, that's a podcast episode. Oh well, but I know they just came out with a microphone. Here it is, the Podmic.
Podmic, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm not sure what that's, somebody said it's not super expensive, but it's kind of, I noticed that the, if we're going to get our geek on, the frequency range is 50 hertz to 13 hertz. So it doesn't go quite as bassy as something like the proverbial high PR40, or which is kind of a good thing, but it also doesn't go as high-end-ish, if that's even a word, as something like the RE20. So it's not, I'll be interested to hear what that sounds like, which sounds like it's geared towards the human voice without being the phone. So I see you're using, is that a high PR40?
Yeah, that is.
There we go. I said the magic word. It's a thing we do here. What are you using for?
There was a gift. That's the best part. From a client.
When you do your YouTube stuff, I always see the PR40 in the shot. Is that actually what you're using for the audio? Because I'm always amazed because you're not right up on your mic. You're kind of back a bit and you're talking to the camera. Do you have another shotgun mic, something that's pointing at you for your video? Or
no, but I think part of it is sort of it's a Logitech that the Logitech C920, with the kind of a wide angle, or C922, I think it is now. I've got a 920 and a 922. The 920 I've got for like this little teleprompter device that I'm using. But no, yeah, I'm using that, but it's going into a couple of tools on the Mac, Loopback and Audio Hijack, which sort of does the internal routing, and that allows me to actually apply some of the effects and do EQ and do a little bit of compression before recording it, because the issue with recording on YouTube is that I don't want to mix the audio together after the fact. So, there were a number of challenges in trying to produce a video-based show, but still get that podcast quality sound out of it. And that's the solution that that we came up with. And the whole geeky breakdown of how of our workflow is actually in episode 9 of the podcast growth show, and that explains all the tools that we use. I'm not that happy with the results. I mean, I think it's okay. I think it's still recording on an H6 and doing some nice post production. You can't beat that ever.
Well, somebody in the chat room mentioned, what was the name of the plugin you mentioned about? Is it just reduce bounce rate?
Yes, I think that's what it is. Let me look it up real quick and I'll paste it into the chat box. But yeah, that's sort of a staple for all of our WordPress instances. And I think you actually had someone ask, I think this was one of the questions on your Trello board. I'm not sure, I don't remember who it was or who the name was, but the question was, should I use WordPress.org or WordPress.com? And this is an example of why you want to use WordPress.org and actually install a iteration of WordPress and host it yourself, is because there are 8 million talented developers developing solutions like this one that could do anything in your business. And the only way that you can take advantage of that, is by a WordPress instance that, you yourself own and that is hosted by you and not on WordPress.com. And that's sort of like another one of my bugaboos in terms of, we're talking about iTunes and over focusing on iTunes. Mm. The other one for me is sort of this idea of digital sharecropping, that was a term coined by Nicholas Carr, and it's the distribution it's a Web 2.0 term from way back then, and it's that the production of content is distributed to many, but the benefits are harvested only by a few. And what we see a lot is that when we first start working with clients, is they're diluted, their digital presence is diluted all over the place. They're writing on Medium, they're posting on Facebook, they've got a YouTube channel, their content is all over the place, and it doesn't ever tie together to one central business asset. And we're huge on that. We think that and that's why I'm pro having something like WordPress.com as your primary domain, as where all your content lives, where your show notes are, where your YouTube channels are shared from, and then it goes out from there. When you're sharing on social media, don't share your iTunes episode from within the App Store. Don't share a Stitcher episode from where it lives on Stitcher. Don't share YouTube from your YouTube channel. What we do is, we share it from our website's show notes, so that's the thing that has a chance of being discovered, of getting shared, and of going viral. And for me, that was sort of the answer to that question around like, hey, WordPress.com or WordPress.org is, don't digitally sharecrop, go for WordPress.com.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Anybody I know, it's kind of interesting whether it's, you're using the Podbean page or a Libsyn page or WordPress.com because it's free. It seems like, or Squarespace is another one. And Squarespace looks like, man, this thing will do everything. And it seems like inevitably you will come up with a scenario that you go, oh, I wish this did this. Yeah. And that's when you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to move. Cause I have people that they'll say, well, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm just going to do this. I want to get the message out and this and that. I'm like, okay, well, I said, actually in that case, if you're going to use Podbean, use the Podbean page, or Libsyn, use the Libsyn page. It's a great place to listen and subscribe to your show. And they do it for 6-7 months and they go, we're thinking of selling t-shirts. Then I'm like, okay, you can kind of do some of that. And then they're like, oh, okay, now we want to grow an email list. And they start getting more and more into kind of the business end of things. And all of a sudden, like, how do I do A/B testing on a Libsyn site? And you're like, yeah, that's not going to work. So I'm with you. I'm like, let's just start on WordPress.org, whatever host you like. I'm a big fan of Siteground. There are many of them out there. And I'm just like, why not? Because I don't know, but to me, I used to be married to a woman whose hobby was moving. Like every other year we were moving. And I'm here to tell you, it's not fun. And it's also not fun when you're moving websites, even though it's just, in some cases, it's export and import and clone, and it's still a hassle. So I'm like, why not start where you're going to end up and go that route? So we do have a question here in the chat room. Scott says, in my stats, what's the difference between listeners who used Apple Core Media, iPhone, and iTunes? Yes, you just one listened on an iPhone, and one iTunes is the old. It's the old iTunes is back in the day. I think it has like still 17%. I'd have to go ask Rob. But iTunes is the desktop software, the ugly, bloated, my show notes look like caca software on your desktop. I always just lump them together because there's Apple Core Media, there's iTunes, and then there's iTunes Stored is another one. And to me, I just look at all three of those and go, yep, Apple stuff. I'm not really that worried about where. I just want them to listen. I don't. Do you dig that deep into the weeds, Juergen, with that kind of stuff?
Well, with the analytics,
yeah. Like, do you care if it's on iTunes or the Apple Podcast?
No, I care about website visits mostly.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. Kari says, I redid my website last September and it was so, yeah, exactly. So if you I always say start where you want to end up. And I realize, with sometimes you're like, yeah, but the website is, I don't know, $12 a month or something like that. And a lot of times it's less than that, but okay. You play Frisbee or if you go bowling, every hobby has a fee to it. So I know it would be great if it was free, but it would also be great if, unicorns were roaming out in the yard and things of that nature. This is always a fun one. Holy cow, 1123. And I forgot to copy the name of the person who said this, but they said, I've been podcasting for a little while now, and I'm still finding it hard to engage with new or even longtime listeners. Have you been able to overcome this obstacle and continue to build and grow your audience? The one I see, and then Juergen, I'll see if you have any ideas. The one that always amazes me is I'll have somebody say, I'm not getting any feedback from my show. And I go out to their website and there's no contact page. That's the one I'm always like, wait, how? Yeah. Or they'll say, well, I say, email Dave at School of Podcasting in the episode. And I'm like, yeah, but if maybe you finally got them to go to your website and they're like, wait, was it support? Info? What was the email? What are some of the things you see people do when they're trying to get people to engage? Like, is there any other low-hanging fruit? I realize I took the really easy answer. Can you think of anything else?
The low-hanging fruit. Well, I do think that having a URL, a custom URL or a URL shortener for every episode, so that you can mention it on the air a lot, and have then something to offer. So if you're, if you want feedback, if you are wanting your listeners to ask questions, for example, if you need to mention a place to go for them, and maybe it's not just your podcast homepage. Maybe you can have something different to try on every episode. So if it's a downloadable, if it's an option, even if it's like jump on a consulting call for me. I mean, I'm coming from a business perspective again,
sure.
So I apologize for that. But still, being able to say something like myshow.com/E1 or go to /E1 and, contact us, or announce a Q&A episode to your list. It depends on how big your list is, but we're going through a launch right now where a guy who's got a couple of books out, he's reasonably well known. He's sending out a blast to his, to his email list saying, look, ask me dating questions, because we're going to do a whole episode, for you to basically be able to dial in, go live like Dave does, right? I mean, this is awesome. You can just dial in. You can have a chat box. It's a little bit more of a challenge to record a live show, I'm sure. Very sure. But but maybe there are some ways in which to try. I think we're leaving out something, Dave, on this.
Yeah, it's just Michael Hyatt used to do a great thing where he again would have an easy, like a link shortener, and he would, at the end of his episode, he would say, well, today we talked about such and such. If you have any questions on that, go out to shortenedlink.com. Next week, we're going to talk about such and such. If you've ever had that experience. So he asked them very specific questions. It wasn't, what do you think of this? It was a little more specific than that. Although if what do you think of this topic is that specific, as opposed to, hey, send us feedback. Well, no, it's like, no, what do you think about whatever? It's a little more, it's less work for the listener, because you've asked them a specific question. It's kind of like, if I were to ask Juergen, why did you get into podcasting versus tell us a little bit about yourself? Because he can go anywhere. Why? From Germany and I did this and that. Whereas when did you get into podcasting? He doesn't have to think about it. Oh, that's a specific answer. So I think if you can give your audience a little clearer path of exactly what you're looking for. And then what I do is I've seen people do this. Oh, follow me on Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and Bookface and, whatever.io and leave out the E's and schoolofpodcasting.com/contact. So if you want to, you can use SpeakPipe, you can use my email, you can call in my voicemail. It's all there, schoolofpodcasting.com/contact. And that kind of goes back to the link shortener that just makes life a whole lot easier. I did want to tie this in with one thing somebody asked about. And then this was from Jack. And he said, I'm producing a podcast for, he says, participants in quotation marks, almost like a game show. We need various 100% random guests with a rotating core of panelists. Any suggestion in an organic way to find participants? I do not want to go through casting. The last line is the one that threw me. Because here's my worry about this. If you're you're trying to do something that requires an audience, and depending on who you are, you may not have one yet. I did this exact thing. I did a show called the Dates from Hell Show, and I thought it would be based on my audience's stories that they would send in. The problem is I didn't have an audience, so I didn't have any stories. And then my worry is by not doing any kind of casting, you're going to let anybody on your show. That could be really entertaining, and it could also blow up in your face. I don't know. What do you think, Juergen?
Yeah, it's that's a tough one. I mean, I think one, maybe an idea would be to run a contest, like we did, like the launch contest for podcast launches and to get iTunes reviews. That was a method that worked really well a couple of years ago, when reviews really were a critical part of whether you would make it into the new and noteworthy section. Harken back to over focusing on iTunes for a second, but still, running those contests can be a really effective way. And I'm thinking, like, hey, if you go to some of those contest platforms, we did a whole episode on that. I think that was episode on these platforms and how to launch contests. And actually, I'm giving away a whole podcast equipment package starting next week, doing something very similar. But the idea is this: you can, some of those contest platforms allow you to, to ask multiple questions and to pre-qualify and basically get them to fill out a survey or answer a number of questions. And if you ask the right questions, then maybe that can take the place of the casting, which he doesn't want to do, right? Now you'd have to give something away. I think much like maybe with the podcast launch, it's not about the cost of the prize, it's more about the relevance to it. So if you could find kind of a cool giveaway, that would have a chance. And probably you would have to spend very little money on Facebook to promote that, and to get a throttle on just how many entrants you want to actually receive. Because I guarantee if you put a couple of $100 in Facebook ads next to a well done contest, you're going to get a ton of entries. And if you set the contest software up in a way that could pre-qualify the contestants, to be invited onto the game show, that's something that you could sort of automate the process with.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe we'll talk about that's the wrong button, Dave. I wanted to fade that in, not blast everybody's head off. Learning the tools of the Rodecaster Pro here. That might be something we talk about in post show, because you have a lot of really cool tools that you play with. Maybe we'll play with those in the post show. Right now, you do your show in seasons, right?
Yes, that's sort of a pod fading excuse, I think.
Okay.
In terms of but I think seasons give you a lot of flexibilities, because you can have a topic and you can have a particular goal. So the first season for me was the solo experiment of doing both YouTube, and some pretty fancy video things and other kinds of, but it's exhausting. Like, it took so much work. The second season, I'm hoping to actually invite existing podcasters to talk about what they did to promote and grow their show, what worked for them. and
Nice.
what would they recommend, for others. So, that might be a little bit easier season than maybe an audio only one.
Do you
But
know
that's kind of the reason, right? Like, stagger to do
Sure.
seasons that way.
Do you know when season 2 is coming out?
No.
Okay.
within a month,
tuned.
within a month or so. Yep.
Yeah. But you can find Juergen over at podcastgrowthshow.com. Yes, podcastgrowthshow.com. Any other websites we want to plug?
It's really part of Polymash. And if you Google Polymash podcasting or, podcast content strategy, I mean, our focus has been on discoverability via Google. And so, there's a whole lot of podcast related keywords that we rank for on page 1.
Nice.
And the nice thing is there's something about, there would be a great topic, content distribution of show notes is a methodology that's gotten our show, even though it's only a month old, has gotten 3 or 4 of those episodes on page 1 of Google, and I'm getting traffic, and I've had to stop accepting clients from it. So that might be a topic for the future.
There you go. Yeah, that's always a good problem when you say, "Oh wow, I got too much business." I have a few people that have started a podcast and they had to quit their podcast because they got too many clients. John Dennis, who's one of the guys behind Podfest, had that problem, and I said, "Man, what did you do?" And he goes, I just put out some of my best tips and tricks. And one of them was like this huge company had contacted him and things like that. So on the let's see, we have 1 minute and 21 seconds. So season 2, do you know what season 2 is going to be about?
Well, it's about interviewing other podcasters and people, like people on what made their show grow, and what have they tried, and then maybe do like tips and tricks. I'm sort of playing with the idea of like, hey, do I want to do that live? I'm not sure. I'll ask your advice later.
Yeah. This week on the School of Poddcasting is the episode I've been working on for about a month. And that is, I asked somebody once, how do you know your show is good? And they kind of slightly actually got offended. And I have rephrased that. How do you know your content is connecting with your audience? And I interviewed a bunch of people, and it's interesting because it's a bunch of people, but it's all answering the same question. How does my content connect? So that'll be out Monday at the schoolofpoddcasting.com. We are here every Saturday morning at 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. AskThePodcastCoach.com/live. Juergen, thanks for coming on, buddy.
Awesome to be with you.
And everybody stick around. We'll be doing some post-show coming right up. This is where we dance.